Well, hello everyone. My name is Erica Britton, and today I am joined by my co-assistant director, Emma Watts.
Hello.
And today we have a very special guest on our Paths to Publishing interview series. Today we are joined by Benson Shum, who is a picture book author, illustrator, and animator. Benson, would you like to introduce yourself and briefly share about your work?
Sure. Thanks, Erica, and thanks for having me on this. It's wonderful. Yeah, so I think you said my name is Benson Shum. I'm a children's book author, illustrator, and animator. I've been in the book industry for about I think 6 years now, and I've published 9 books, and I got a couple more coming in the next year. So, and I've been animating for about 20 years, so that's been a while. But yeah, it's good.
Okay, so the first question that we have for you is just kind of about your passion for storytelling, both visually and through creating like picture books. So we want to know, where did your passion for this come from, and if it's been a lifelong dream or if you had different career plans when you were younger.
Yeah, so it is a little cheesy. I've always wanted to be creative as a kid. Like especially for animation. Ever since I was young, I've always drawn, and then when I found out that animation could be a job, that's kind of like my path to kind of draw a lot, figure out how to kind of get into the industry. And then with books was something that I've always loved as a kid. I've always borrowed a lot of books from the library. But for me, it was mostly kind of looking at the drawings. My sister was the one that was reading most of it. I was just looking at drawings. And I think storytelling was something that I kind of was it's kind of part of the whole drawing. You know, when you draw, you try to tell a story. And with books, it's with a single drawing or a few pages kind of thing. So I think that kind of led me into the book world as well. So instead of having moving pictures, I'm telling a story with just fewer pages.
Yeah, well, I mean, that actually flows really well into one of our next questions is you said when you found out about animation as a job or kind of started looking into illustrations things. So when, if you remember, was your earliest memory of learning about these career opportunities with illustration or with animation?
So do you mean like when did I first remember that I want to get into animation or the book publishing side?
Either or both, whichever one you want to answer.
Okay, I think it was after The Little Mermaid came out, or when I found out that there was like a behind the scenes or something I saw on maybe on TV or on a video or something on behind the scenes of them. I'm like, wow, there's people actually drawing these and creating these characters and making these stories. So that was probably in my early teens, I think. And then with books was something that I discovered when I was at where I'm at right now at the Disney Studios. They have a children's book program. Unfortunately, it no longer exists, but it's called the Walt Disney Artist Showcase. And what that program does is it encourages artists at the studio to kind of create their own characters and their own stories. I thought I want to give it a try, right? So I create the story and gave a few illustrations to kind of showcase what the book would look like. And then I just submitted it. And it was who runs it is that the directors at our studio, as well as representatives from Disney Hyperion. So they create the program together. And then from there, it was kind of like going through the process of like, did you make the cut for the first pass and the second pass and do revision? And then eventually I was very fortunate that mine was selected to be part of the program. So that's kind of how I got into learning more about the industry.
That's really neat. I didn't know that existed or used to exist.
Yeah, it's not the traditional route, you know. And then it was after that, even though I made that book with Hyperion, I still didn't know or understand the broad strokes of the industry. It wasn't until I went to SCBWIs when I learned all the intricacies and all, what an agent was and what a picture book dummy was. I didn't know any of that stuff. I just kind of made that with the editor and the art director at Hyperion. So I didn't have all that other knowledge beforehand. So I was kind of relearning after the first book came out. So yeah, it's a different process.
So we would actually like to know a little bit more in detail about kind of the process of whichever book, all of your books, like if it's different between them, but kind of the process of getting the book published a little bit more in detail. So like, how do you get from the conception of an idea of a book all the way to the final touches before it gets published?
I guess the idea could come from anywhere. It's kind of different for every book. Sometimes it could be I overhear somebody saying something, or if I see something that's interesting, I could use, or memory. So I could use like my book series ANZU the Great Kaiju, which is the first one. And then I have the second one that just came out this year called ANZU the Great Listener. So these books kind of came out on a memory or a feeling that I had as a kid. So I love the ideas of giant monsters. So a kaiju is a Japanese term for giant monsters. So Godzilla is a kaiju. And growing up, I loved watching Power Rangers, and just the idea of these monstrous beings and then terrorizing cities. And then I thought about like, well, what if, like, what are they feeling? You know, because then I made sure I was thinking about what the character's feeling and what they're going through at that moment. And I thought, well, what if this monster doesn't want to destroy? What if they want to bring joy instead of bringing fear to their citizens or to the villagers? That kind of sparked the idea of a gentle kaiju, a kauju's powers that are not destructive, or they could be, but they choose to show kindness instead of chaos. And that's kind of how that idea came up. So I started to write the story on that. And eventually once I thought the idea was, or the rough story was rough, there I started to do sketches. And then I'll start to create a dummy and I'll show it to my critique group, get feedback back and forth for a while. And then when I think it's ready, then I'll show the dummy to my agent to get her thoughts. And then very luckily for this one, she didn't really have a lot. She just wanted to send it out. So I did a few final art, I just spread or two, just so that they can, when they send it out, they know what it looked like. And then from there, we got a few offers from different publishers. And then we went with Warren Brook at Macmillan and worked with the editor there, which is amazing, and the art director as well. Yeah, that's how I kind of made those two books with them. So.
That's really neat. Thanks for sharing about that. Also, Anzu is adorable. Emma and I have had so many conversations about how sweet the book is. And yeah, just big fan. Next thing we want to know about is you have both been the author and illustrator for books and then also just the illustrator on some other books, right? So how is that process different when you are illustrating your own story versus another author's, or do you feel like they're very similar?
They're similar and different in some ways. I think the difference is, I think it's really, you should kind of feel that pressure to make sure you do a good job, you know, because it's not your text. And it's not that you won't do a good job on your text. It's just that there's that added pressure of like, you want to make sure that your illustrations live up to the story for the editor and also the author as well. You can add things that is not in the text. You know, for example, like with Sloth, you know, Adam, who's the author, left a lot of space, you know, where there wasn't a lot of text. So I filled that in with the Sloth expressions or their feelings and all that kind of stuff. So then the text doesn't necessarily doesn't have to match the words. So you just add another layer to the story. Or one of my other board books I illustrated called Go to Sheep, and that one, it was just one sheep, but I decided to add two other sheep, like siblings or something, to add a little bit of attention to it, and also add a little mice that kind of that is throughout the whole book. You see it just doing their own thing, you know. It wasn't in the text or anything like that, but I thought that was a little fun thing that kids can point out as to, you know. Whereas when I'm author and illustrating, I'm actually thinking at the same time. So while I am writing, I am mentally thinking about what this could look like. It will change probably, but while I'm writing, I'm already kind of deciding that, oh, I think the illustrations can tell this point. I can probably not have that text. I'll still write it out, but eventually I will take the text out. It's just, for me, I just kind of bounce back and forth in my head as I'm writing.
That is really like interesting to hear the process of how it changes versus when you're illustrating someone else's work versus your own. And so that leads into our next question, which is kind of just with the editing process of your illustrations, if you're asked to make any tweaks or any changes, is that different for you when you're illustrating your own work versus someone else's work? Or do the edits are they kind of like similar between whatever you're doing?
I would say they're pretty similar. In animation, we do get a lot of critique on our work pretty much constantly. You know, we show something for first look to the directors, and then it's never going to be perfect. So we will always have to go back and revise and revise and revise. And I think with book, it's the same thing, that, you know, even if the note comes in, you know, I don't have an issue changing it, but usually I do this in animation as well. I tend to ask questions about, I usually ask why, and it's not to defy the note. It's just so I understand how can I interpret that note the best way? So I do ask a lot of questions. So that gives me clarity, and that makes it easier for me to do that note. And I think it also makes it clear for the editor or the director given the note also, so that we're on the same page. Because sometimes it's very easy to misinterpret a note and miscommunicate something because we can't read each other's minds. So I think by me or by them asking questions back and forth to kind of solidify what we're trying to get at. That makes sense.
No, that does. And this is not a scripted question that we had, but I'm just curious. Do you feel like having those kind of clarification questions or that kind of back and forth communication is a standard practice within like book publishing or I guess animation too? Or do you feel like that's something that has been kind of unique to the people that you work with, that they've been open to having conversations and clarifying your questions?
Yeah, I think that that's a good question because with I think with both industries, it depends on who your supervisor is or who the editor or art director or director is and how they communicate as well. So it's kind of also adjusting to how they communicate, right? So if they're not very communicative, then you have to find a way to get what you need from them without maybe a lot of questions, you know? But I've been very fortunate that most of the directors and editors and art directors I have worked at are very reciprocal for having a dialogue, you know? And not everyone's like that, and that's fine. It's just adjusting to the situation that you're in.
So, in addition to the work that you've done with picture books and illustrating and writing them, you've also worked in animation at the Walt Disney Studios. And we were wondering if you could share a little bit about your journey to becoming a Disney animator with us.
Sure, yeah. So after high school, to the scare of my parents, I didn't really apply to colleges. I just kind of applied to the animation school. Well, it's a college, in Canada. They had an animation program. I applied there, but you need a portfolio. So I did a portfolio. I didn't get in, so I didn't go to school right after high school. So I ended up working in the food industry for a year while I was still drawing, and then I worked on portfolio drawing for a while, and then I got on second year, and I was very grateful for that actually because I realized a lot of my colleagues in that classroom applied multiple times or just applied once and didn't get in. So I think there was a drive in our class that we really did push each other once we got in, and we were more appreciative of it. And a lot of my colleagues are either at Pixar or at Disney or at Sony. They're some of them have traveled around the world, and some are working in video games. And I think that was a big part of it, is kind of not getting the first time, trying again, and then getting it in. But yeah, so that was a bit of a tangent. But yeah, so once I got in, it was a 2-year program. I got out and I started to do prop design, character design, bit of everything in the TV industry, layout, background, storyboards, editing. And I think that in some ways trained me in my book world as well, because you kind of do all that, on your own. But after doing the 2D side of things, like 2D for TV, 3D animation was becoming a thing. So I decided to go back to school and went back to school for a year to a different school in Ontario, Sheridan. Studied there for a year to learn the 3D software. And then I couldn't find work in 3D when I came back to Vancouver. So I worked back in doing 2D again. And then from there, I worked on my own 3D stuff to get better at it on my own. And then I started to apply everywhere. A lot of rejections, like publishing, lots of rejections. And I got a yes from a game studio up in the UK. So they flew me out to London, worked there for almost 2 years. Got to also work on visual effects. That was my first dip into the visual effects world. And from there, I came back to Vancouver because my visa was expiring. Went back to doing 2D again. So I literally jumped back and forth between industries. And eventually I found work in 3D at one of the other studios doing live action and CG animation. And then Sony popped up in Vancouver. I went to work at Sony. And then I attended this conference called the CTN Expo, which stands for Creative Talent Network, which is an animation specific workshop or conference. And Disney happened to be there. So I showed my portfolio on my phone, like my animation reel. And very luckily, the person that saw my work liked it, and they got my visa within the next few months. And then I've been at Disney for about 11 years now. So yeah, it's definitely not a straight journey, a lot of winding paths, but I do think that made me a better artist because I did meet a lot of people, and the industry is very small, just like publishing. Yeah, and I think that's one of the best parts in animation and in publishing is the people that you work with and also the people that you meet along the way. And that's something that I really loved about when I started working in publishing was that the people are very similar. People are very giving, very generous with their time and sharing. And and we're all creative people. So I thought that was pretty great.
Your answers are just blending so well with all of our questions. Because our next question is that, funnily enough, you are the second author slash illustrator slash Disney animation artist that we've talked to recently. We just interviewed Victoria Ying, who is a graphic
Oh, yeah.
novel artist and writer, and then also worked as a visual development artist on some of some of the same films that you actually worked on.
Mhm.
And she explained kind of what it is to create concept art for a film, and she also shared about how working in animation kind of helped prepare her to be a graphic novelist. So, you kind of mentioned that there are things working in animation that helped prepare you for publishing, strengthening your art style, being creative, working with different people. So if you have any more specific examples that you'd like to share, like how did your work in animation or across all these different, fields that you talked about, like how did that help prepare you to be a picture book author, or how did that help prepare you to kind of break into publishing a little more intentionally?
Mhm. Yeah, no, well, Victoria's amazing. Victoria Yang, she's so great. I remember when I first started and I saw her work at the studio, I'm like, wow, so cool. And then she got into publishing, which is really cool. So Victoria is a visual development artist. I do specifically animation, so the the movement, the acting of the characters. And so my focus was really on character and the thoughts and stuff like that. So I think for me was we did a lot of life drawing, a lot of expressions, like expressive drawings. So I think I try to translate a lot of my work, a lot of emotions into my drawings, because in animation it's about movement, right? And you have to be able to convey a sincere emotion in a few seconds on the screen, and it just goes to the next shot, next cut. But in books, you kind of linger on that one page or 32, 40 pages. Whereas in film, you have an hour and a half to tell the whole thing. Learning to capture an emotion that could kind of encapsulate that whole paragraph or a couple of lines of text was something that I think animation prepared me for. Also, eye direction. I think that's whether that's visual development or even in animation is how do you lead the reader or the audience that's watching a movie to what you want to look at? That could be like the backgrounds where they might lead your eye to the center or to where the character is looking or to where you want the reader to focus. So I use composition and layout and like storyboarding on how to compose my pages so that it's the most clearest and direct emotion as possible. Let's see what else. Well, page turns was something was interesting for me. I didn't so we think about screen direction, right? Leading from let's say left to right. And then that's something that my art director reminded me on my first book was that I had a character looking the other way, even though the main character was looking this way. Because let's face both characters this way, because that'll lead the reader to turn the page. And so screen directions, it's similar in film to books, but there's something even more specific about books, just because you want to actually make the reader turn it. Whereas in film, you're more of a passive viewer that is things are moving for you, whereas in books you actively have to be engaged with it.
Yeah. Do you feel like when you were, talking like page turns, right? And just kind of having to shift how you thought of like illustrations and thought of the design, do you feel like that was kind of challenging at first, but you got a hang of it? Or was it something like even now you kind of have to like, shift your brain when you think about illustrations?
I think it's kind of a game. It's kind of like how can I make the reader turn the page? So whether that's visually or whether that's in text, like leaving space for like, oh, what's gonna happen next? I think even with novels the same way. How do you make people read the next chapter right away? So it's like leaving a word out, and you I want to find out what happens next. So I think that it's kind of a game to kind of find different ways to lead the reader to turn the page.
you just mentioned how like animation and like working in animation has prepared you for kind of like trying to figure out how to incorporate that stuff into your books. And earlier in the interview, you talked about how you felt like really inspired by your classmates to like push yourself harder because they were all also working very hard. And so we kind of want to know if working at Disney or like working with other animators and other people on all of these creative projects helped inspire you in creating picture books, like if the workplace was very encouraging of your other like creative pursuits and if it inspired you as you like kind of moved into the publishing world.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think because like specifically at Disney, they do have a lot of art on the walls and a lot of different styles of art. We have our standard Disney style, but we also have a lot of visual development artists that have their own taste on how they draw characters or how they draw things. And I think that pushed me to experiment more. I never really was trained, like I never had a class to paint like traditionally. So a lot for me was asking questions, whether it's an artist at the studio or looking online or asking friends that are amazing painters how they approach things, and I just kind of adapted certain things and what worked for me, kind of thing. So I think that was really inspiring. What was the other question? Did I answer that?
I think it's just like if any of your colleagues or like working with other creative people inspired you as you moved
Oh,
into publishing.
yeah, yeah. I think also there's actually a lot of artists that worked in animation that also do a lot of books. So like Mary Blair was a very big inspiration for me. She did all the visual development for Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, and then there's also I think it's Martin and something Provinson. They did a lot of visual development for Disney, but they also did a lot of like golden books and that, stuff like that. So I think I've always seen those books, but never thought that I could jump into that. But having seen that and what they took from animation into the illustration or vice versa was inspiring for me for sure. I still reference those books too.
Something that you just talked about is that you didn't really have any formal, like training per se on how to like paint or, art things. Kind of seems like you figured out as you went. Something that when we've talked to other, authors or people in the publishing industry, there's split opinions, on whether or not you need a, degree in creative writing or if you need, special like classes or workshops to do things. For you, when you're figuring out your own like art style or, working to kind of draft these stories and these picture books, do you feel like you ever wished that you had more formal training or classes? Or do you feel like kind of figuring out as you went worked best for you and then extending that if someone were to ask, what you would you advise figure it out on your own and explore or get that kind of formal training?
Yeah, that's tough because I think it's different for everyone. I guess for me, it's like it would have been nice probably to do have a bit of like classes on creative writing, but it might not be it doesn't have to be necessary for you. I think because I was already kind of older when I started to get into publishing, and I didn't want to go back to school in the sense of like the whole setting of going to college and all that kind of stuff because I was already kind of working, so I didn't have time for that. So my schooling was books. I just read a lot, whether that's reading about writing or reading about how to write books or just reading picture books of the genre that I want to write in. I think that's also just as valuable. Um, and and yeah, if you don't have the time to go to a college, then this is just as valuable. Yeah, I think yeah. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
So in terms of like things you've done after you published like your picture books on your website, it says that you go to a lot of events like schools and book festivals. You were at the Tucson Festival of Books, right down here,
Yes. Yeah.
and you do like bookstore signings. And so we just kind of want to know what your favorite part of these events are and why you think they're important for children book creators.
Yeah, I think going to book festivals are really cool. When we do get invited, not I understand not everybody gets invited, so I feel very appreciated to be at the Tucson Book Festival, and to meet Stephanie, who introduced us to you both, and I think it's really connecting with people, whether that is fellow readers or parents or kids when you're doing story time, because we do our work in isolation, and it's nice to be able to be out there and see how people react to the stories and just kind of connect with the people that are actually reading, and it's because even if you're just a reader, it's you are reading on your own, so it's nice to kind of share that kind of excitement for the love of books at book festivals. That even could be at story time too, a kid seeing a kid hug a book or just excited about looking at pictures or reading, I think that kind of keeps me going.
Yeah. It's a really sweet sentiment. I think it's also so important to think about, especially with picture books, that these are some of the earliest times that young children, or even not so young children, but like young children can,
Older children
you
too,
know,
like adults. Yeah.
yeah, no, literally, like
Kids, yeah.
all of us love picture books. I have a
Yeah.
stack of them right next to me. But yeah, it's like some of the first times that, children get exposed to, storytelling and art, and just all of just like way to connect. And yeah, talking about picture books, I get really excited. But as we kind of start to wrap up the interview, we just want to ask if there's anything else about your publishing experience that we haven't addressed that you would like to talk about, or any insights that you've had while in publishing and in other spaces that you feel like would be good for someone who is on the outside kind of wanting to get into publishing to know.
Understanding that I think we all know publishing is a very difficult industry, but understand that getting rejections and no's and lots of critique is part of the process. It's hard. Like I completely understand and feel for that, because in animation I get so many rejections, could be in the form of critiques, how to make it better kind of thing. And it's never easy, they say don't take it personal, it's just business kind of thing, which I get. But at the same time, you are putting yourself into your work, and if you do, of course it's going to hurt a little bit. I think it's good to acknowledge that, but also to be like, okay, how can I make this better, or what can I do next? Maybe this idea is something that maybe I need to shelve for a bit. I started something new. So to just kind of know that getting rejected is very common, it happens to everybody, even the people that are bestsellers. It will never go away, but it will make that one yes that much better.
That is really, really good advice. And I think something a lot of people need to hear, because I know a lot of people who are getting into the field, definitely rejection can sting. And I'm sure it can still maybe sting a little bit, even if you've gotten hundreds of them.
Yeah.
But finally, to wrap up this interview, we just want to know if you have anything planned for the future and what readers or animation lovers can look forward to, if you have any fun projects you are able to share with us at the moment.
Yeah, so well, right now for the animation side, we are in the midst of working on Wish, and that is our next animated film coming Thanksgiving. So yeah, so we have a few more months on that, so it's exciting. And then one of my latest books that just came out a couple of weeks ago, it's called Cindy and Panda, and it's about, if you like pandas and you like pies, and you like this kind of chaos and friendship, that's what this book is about. It's where Cindy, is baking a pie with her mom, but she doesn't always follow recipes. So she goes out to the gardens to find the ingredient. She comes back with a panda, and then like chaos ensues as they're baking, kind of thing. So yeah, that one just came out in May, and I have another picture book coming out called First Night of Howler Garden. That one's about kind of like a first day of school story, but set in the world of werewolves, where Sophie is afraid she will not transform into a werewolf, and she might be ousted from the werewolf other kids, So that kind of fear of not fitting in, and what if she stays human, everyone's gonna not, she'll be outcasted kind of thing. I'm also, right now, I'm in the midst of doing final art for a book called Mooncake Queen's Family. It's kind of in this, like for Alice's Good Fortunes, the same editor, Renee Kelly, she's awesome at Penguin, and we're doing a couple of books kind of in the same format, but this one's about the Mid-Autumn Festival on mooncakes, and then after that, we're going to do one about the lion dance. I have an imagination story as well coming out next January. So just a few things, just juggling just a few things. So,
Yeah, I mean, you say just a few things. That seems like a lot and very exciting work.
yeah.
Well, Vincent, thank you so much for taking time to chat with us about your career, both in publishing and animation, and for sharing your insights and experiences. And for our viewers and listeners, as we shared, ANZU the Great Listener and Cindy and Panda, new books out now. And then we have some wonderful titles to look forward to, as well as some feature animation films to look forward to. So again, Vincent, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, thank you, Erica, for having me here, and also please thanks Stephanie for bringing us together. I really appreciate it.